Okay, so if you have any questions arising from the last discussion that we have, you can raise them now. Otherwise, we will move on. Shall we move on?
Hey, Father.
Yes,
I have
Gio.
a question, maybe not related to the last discussion, but someone raised this about the discussion. For each reading assignment, there's a discussion, also the question and also thesis statement.
Okay, yes,
Are we
yes.
required to answer those discussion part?
Those guide questions are actually myself being charitable, meaning I I I raise them. I raise those questions to guide your reading. Okay. In other words, those are the important points that you should be looking for as you go through the reading. But note, that is only until after I'm tired of doing it. It's the beginning of the semester, so I'm still gung-ho about all these things. But maybe later on when I have to start correcting papers, unless Angelo helps me, then I will stop raising those questions. In other words, I will stop helping you. No, I will still do that. Try it. I'll still try. But you don't have to answer them if you don't want to. That's fine. In other words, they're not for the discussion board. They're for your guidance. Okay? Any other questions? All right. So maybe from now on, let's just settle the date of the days for our classes. I thought originally that Monday would be the best time for us to meet, Monday and Friday, because I also have another class which I meet Wednesdays and Fridays. But it seems that I need those extra 2 days before I meet any class of mine during the week. So we will have Wednesdays and Fridays until I change my mind. Okay. Yes, Gerard.
Sana po ang Valentine's Day niyo po, Father?
Ano yan?
Sana po Valentine's Day niyo po, Father?
Hindi kita marinig, hindi kita maintindihan, Gerard.
Musta po Valentine's Day niyo po, Father?
Basta, okay, I will laugh. I did not understand, but I will laugh anyway.
Father, kumusta daw Valentine's Day niyo?
Ako?
Sabi ni Teo.
I was fine. I prayed the whole day. No, actually, I had a mass for a student who is about 40 years old and who died recently. So it was a very good Valentine's Day because I got to meet my past students. So, and then we were able to say hello to each other. And I think that's the best way to spend Valentine's. How about you? Not that I care, but if you had a good Valentine's, good for you. Okay? But please stay careful. Have you seen the first group? What do you call this? The first group of face-to-face here in campus? Have you? No? No pictures at all? I don't know if I can share it with you. Let me see. I cannot. So I have to show you.
Ayaw po namin mainggit, Father.
Hindi, huwag kayong mainggit kasi hindi maganda. Huwag kayong mainggit. I'm telling you, it's not something that you would like to do for now. This is what it looks like. Do you see this?
What class is that?
This is development studies, I think.
Sir, is that SOM? Looks like a SOM classroom.
Dev study.
Ah,
Social sciences yata, Father.
yeah, social sciences. Di ba? This is not a way to hold a class. I'm sure that when they leave the classroom, they're not even allowed to walk side by side. Okay, just in case you don't know yet, we are already using our blue passes. Do you have that already with you?
Sir, I don't think we're required because we don't have regular classes. So we're not asked to get a blue pass.
Then you'll never get in, even if you want to visit, right?
Father, do
I think we can, but we just have to ask permission.
Ah, okay, good.
you have classes, Father, on site?
Me?
Are you teaching? Yeah.
No, I am not. And I don't think I would like to as of now because I can't walk. I am using a walker because I am down with age. So, but next year, I hope I can at least bear the pain and go to a classroom and teach. I do better in a classroom, I think. Okay, enough with this chismis. What are we going to talk about today? I have included in your module the recording of last class. Have you seen it? Okay. I don't bother to edit it anymore. So be patient if there are too many breaks, silence breaks in between. Bahala na kayo mag-pass forward. But Angelo, Sir Perez, can you tell them how to get the first two recordings?
Father, I sent you a Google Drive links,
Mhm.
Google Drive link for both. Do you want the students to access it via Google Drive, or do we have to upload it to YouTube?
You cannot yet they cannot yet access that. No,
The Google Drive, yes. Not yet, Father.
not yet. Yeah, maybe what should we do? Are you able to open everything I can open myself as
In
my
Canvas, yes, Father, I can.
as my TA,
Yes.
including whatever they will submit on Canvas?
I haven't reached that point, Father, since nobody submitting anything yet. But I
Okay.
can edit the modules, the
Ah,
posts.
please don't.
Yeah, I will not. I will not tamper with your course, Father.
Baka ako na tuloy ang malito.
Opo,
Oh,
opo. Kaya nga po, I will not.
What we will do is why don't you send by email those two those two recordings, and I will try to what do you call that, transform them into YouTube viewable so I can include that in our modules. Okay?
Yes, Father. But I think I already sent the files to you.
You have?
Somewhere in your emails po. Baka natabunan lang, but they're supposed to be there, Father.
I don't have too many people writing me, so okay, I'll check again.
Sige po.
All right.
Yes, Father.
Okay, people, this is what I have for today. Moving on, I think from the last class, we ended up by declaring, okay, with Emeric Koreth, that no thinker in the past has been more clearly aware of the ontological difference than Thomas Aquinas. As opposed to what? As opposed to ontic difference. Okay? So it's an ontological difference that Heidegger's complaint was about. And Thomists, contemporary Thomists, who follow existential phenomenological transcendental Thomism, okay, do think that they can see an ontological turn in Thomas Aquinas. Okay, so that there is a distinction very often in Aquinas between beings, ens, and being, esse. And so the distinction is not merely between beings. All right? Although that difference is quite difficult to understand, okay, to have an insight on, in the beginning, I think you will eventually get used to it. When we start talking about, the difference between beings and being, because being would be that by which beings exist. Okay? That will be an ontological difference. So we begin by looking into what metaphysical inquiry is. I'll try to tell you why we have to begin this way. We'll check how metaphysical inquiry is incomplete and relative, how it is even possible, and the next two points will answer the question, is metaphysical inquiry possible? Metaphysical inquiry is possible just because the root and ground of all metaphysical inquiry is being itself, and being is intelligible. If it's not intelligible, then our passion for knowing and reason would be useless. Okay? Now, so this is what we are going to look for in our chapter 1. I included this just recently. Okay. This is the classic way of proceeding in metaphysics. So metaphysics as a science had a structure which scholastics of the 13th century from Aristotle on tried to follow. First, they had the subject matter of metaphysics. They looked at the subject matter of metaphysics called the material object by later scholastics. Note, we don't use those terms anymore, but I want to bring them up here so that you don't get confused, just in case you read metaphysics in that are based on scholastic metaphysics. Now, the subject matter is usually the data to be explained by the science meaning metaphysics. So this is what we would refer to today as the experiential basis for our study of being. Remember, I describe our metaphysics as a metaphysics from below rather than a metaphysics from above. From below, because our question for understanding usually begins with our question about experience. And so this is the subject matter. The second is the formal object, meaning the epistemological part of metaphysics. And the formal object of metaphysics is usually the particular perspective under which the subject matter or the material object is examined. And this will take some getting used to, but when we talk about the perspective or the angle of vision, okay, with which to understand the subject matter or being, we are actually referring not to the beings, but to the fact that they are in the first place. And so we focus on what make beings be. That is the perspective. Okay, we can see all sorts of things. We can touch all sorts of things. We can sense, in other words, all sorts of things. But it's not what we touch, sense, that will be the object of our study in metaphysics, but rather the perspective is to go with, not to go deep into these beings and ask, what is it that makes them be? And that would be the perspective. And then finally, you have, of course, the development of the metaphysics, as a science. It moves from the subject matter to be explained to the principles, explaining them, explaining the subject matter, and then to the ultimate explanation, cause, or conclusions of the science. In other words, I think all throughout, we will be asking, what is the sufficient reason for something? Okay, I see a lantern, okay, hanging here on my window. Okay. I want to know how it got there. And so that question itself begs for an answer that requires an explanation for it being there in the first place. So I'll tell myself, I put it there. That is the sufficient reason for that lantern being there. But I can still move back and ask, why, what explains my putting it out there? It was Christmas. Okay. And so forth and so on. So the principle of sufficient reason, we will see, is the principle that allows us to render intelligible, comprehensible, that will allow us to understand the matter under scrutiny. And in this case, beings, all the way to the causes, all the way to the ultimate cause. And we are following that structure in our metaphysics. That's why we have first the descriptive, okay? The descriptive part being based on what we experience about things and beings. And then we have the explanatory part, which goes to the principles that we need to not assume, but rather accept if our study is not going to be incomprehensible or absurd, even absurd. But even those principles, we will have to back up with, ultimately, how do we explain everything that went before? And that's when we bring in the efficient cause, the final cause. So that is the structure. It doesn't sound scholastic or classic, but I think our metaphysics still goes through the same process, the same structure of metaphysics. Okay, so that in a bird's eye view is the whole metaphysics that we will be studying. So now, wherever the human being extends his intellectual questioning to embrace the whole of reality, seeking to pull together all the obvious multiplicity and diversity into some kind of intelligible unity. That is what goes on in metaphysical inquiry. But let me first say this. Why do we go into metaphysical inquiry first? Why bother to talk about metaphysical inquiry first? Because like I said before, based on what I know philosophy is all about, philosophy is doing philosophy rather than talking about it. Okay? I can start talking, or I can start explaining what philosophy is all about by talking about wonder, by talking about explanations, discussions. But if I am able to do it, I can reflect on what I do, and that is a better way to understand what is going on when I do philosophy. Similarly, when we ask what metaphysics is, we can begin by asking what metaphysical inquiry is. What is it that we do when we do metaphysics? And this is what we do. Okay, let me explain. And if you have any problems understanding, please raise your hands. Wherever the human being extends his intellectual questioning, by that we mean, why is there being and not nothing? Why is the chair there? What makes the sky blue? And why does it look blue? Okay, who put the sun and the moon up there, or what looks like up there? Okay, I know there are scientific answers to those questions, but the way natural science, physical science responds to those questions will not be the way we respond to those questions when the perspective is metaphysical. We are not asking for an explanation of why the moon looks up to be up there. Maybe we are asking ultimately, okay, why there's something we call moon. In other words, we're trying to understand how it is that it is, period. And so whenever we therefore try to question reality, especially using the word why, that would be extending our intellectual questioning to embrace the whole of reality. How is that possible? But I'm only asking about the moon. How is that the whole of reality? There's such a thing as root affirmation. Okay, this does not appear in your texts, but it is something that De Finance, another metaphysician, who whose book was translated by Roque Friols. Okay, the term is root affirmation. Root affirmation. ROOT affirmation. What does that mean? That means that every time I inquire about something, okay, I'm not just in metaphysics, I'm not just interested in that something as an individual thing. I am also at the same time affirming the fact that that something is only because of being. And so at the same time that I'm saying the chair exists, I'm actually affirming existence, existing, being itself. And so it may sound particular, given that we are sensible human beings, or beings using our sense perception. But every time we perceive anything and ask, inquire metaphysically, we are already at the same time questioning being itself. Or you might say, our asking a question about anything in particular already includes asking a question about being itself. In other words, the whole of reality, all of reality. Do you follow? And that is what goes on when we are when we go through metaphysical inquiry. Okay. Now, what do we do in when we embrace the whole of reality? We're actually seeking to pull together all the obvious multiplicity and diversity into some kind of intelligible unity. I think this is going to be a thesis statement that you will be explaining, that we will ask you to explain. Metaphysical inquiry seeks to pull together all the obvious multiplicity and diversity into some kind of intelligible unity. And whoever will ask you, whoever is going to be the professor asking you about this particular thesis, I am sure that he or she will bring you all the way back to the pre-Socratics. So you better know your pre-Socratics or your ancient philosophy. What was the primary question of the pre-Socratics? Does anybody remember? Hmm?
Sir,
Yes, who's this?
it's Pete, sir. Right, sorry about the fan, sir, but can I answer?
Yes,
it's,
sure. Sure.
What is the stuff of the world?
Okay. What is the stuff of the world? Were they talking about what things are made of?
Yes, sir.
And does that question go much deeper than the way we would understand it today?
I believe so, yes, sir, because say, for example, Heraclitus, when he
Okay.
talked about fire, he didn't necessarily mean that, for example, the chair is on fire, but
Okay.
that the chair undergoes process and that process is similar to fire.
All right. Good. In other words, everything is change. Heraclitus, right? So that the only thing that's constant, we have sometimes hear people say, is change. And that is the stuff of which everything is made. But even before Heraclitus could come up with such, let's say, a general observation, what did he have to go through first? The multiplicity and the diversity in experience. Okay? Look around your room. Okay? You see all sorts of things and you can name all sorts of things. But in the end, because your mind has a capacity to grasp unity, it becomes intelligible, and it becomes an intelligible unity precisely because all these things somehow fit together. How do they fit together? That is the subject matter of metaphysics. Being is that which allows me to understand unity even when I experience multiplicity and diversity. Take this down. The term that we will keep on referring to is the problem of the one and many, which is a problem that the pre-Socratics went through, Plato, Aristotle, and all along. Okay, this is the question that they ask in that pushed them to metaphysical inquiry. Okay, and of course, eventually Heidegger came in. Why is there being and not nothing? Why do you think he asked that question? Because he could sense so many things. Okay, so much so that everywhere he turns, his knowing, his eyes, there is being. I don't know if it was Sartre or Camus who said, it is nauseous, the fact that being is everywhere. You look anywhere and there it is. Okay, so pulling together all the obvious multiplicity and diversity into some kind of intelligible unity. Look, that is how the mind works. We will see later on that the mind is capable of grasping something that we eventually say can be known, because it is capable of not, well, maybe a better term can be used, but I want to use the term condense things into something that will be intelligible. Yes, Melchizedek.
Sir, can this possibly be rephrased when we're trying to make? Can this intelligible unity be rephrased into something like that which is common among everything? Being. Is it like that, Puma?
You can, but with a caveat, warning. As long as you don't think of that common, the term common, as something that's physical and that you can handle. Okay? Because being is more than anybody can handle. So when you're still talking about common, it's like, what is common among Athenians? What is common among Filipinos? Not really. What allows the multiplicity of beings to be understood? What allows all these beings to be understood is intelligible unity. Okay? So I said with a caveat. You can use that as long as you understand what we're talking about here.
So it's like the similarity transcends all individuality.
Like death, even death is not like being. Okay? Because if everything dies, you will fall into the problem of how do we explain being at all in the first place? There has to be some being that doesn't die. Otherwise, there's nothing that begins that dies. Something has to be. Because as we will also see, death as something that is common is possible only because beings are contingent. Beings are not self-sufficient in terms of their existence. Okay? And that's why in the end, we will have not just to suppose, but to accept that, to render intelligible our experience of anything that is real, we have to postulate what? That there must be an almighty, an absolute, an infinite as against the finite, and so forth and so on. If you call that God, so be it. But look, you gave a description first of what it should be before you called it anything. Whereas I think the problematic way to get to the end is to define first what God means. No, we look for that which will render intelligible everything that exists, what the characteristics are, and then we can call that any way we want. God, Buddha, whatever, but it must have these characteristics. Yes, Maya.
Sir, two questions lang po, just because I'm kind of lost
Okay.
with something. I'll just put them both down at the same time na lang siguro. The first
Alright.
one is, I'm sort of lost at how we got to the point where there has to be an infinite. Yun yung first like confusion ko. And then yung next confusion ko po, sir, is if, say for example, let's call the infinite being God or Buddha, say for example. If there is a God and God is infinite, and as you stated, sir, beings are contingent and not self-sufficient, does that mean that, quote unquote, God is not a being?
God is, I don't want to answer that here now, Maya, because that will be what we hope to discover towards the end of the course. But since I mentioned it already, let me confuse you further. Okay. Does that mean to say that God is not a being? If you're thinking of a being as something like a chair, like a table, then whatever we will discover as the reason for anything to exist cannot be something like that. Because then you will need to explain it too. You will need to support its existence too. And ad infinitum, because then you'll always ask what furthermore is there, and so forth and so on. So the buck has to stop somewhere. Even logically, di ba? If you have a hierarchy, there has to be a highest. Period. Otherwise, we would go on and on and on and on, which, by the way, is what the philosophers of absurdity would tend to believe. Why not? Okay, why not? And I think Aquinas and the metaphysicians will say, why do you prefer absurdity over something reasonable? No. And so it comes back to you, the question. Would you rather have absurdity or what is reasonable? Okay? So, but wait, Maya, I'm assuring you that will be, well, not assuring you, but I'm hoping that eventually we will get there, your question. So forget that we talked about it here. Okay? Yes, Christian.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, so from what I'm getting, sir, yung principle ng, what do you call it, sufficient reason, it seems to me this is, alam mo yung sir sa rationalists, yung sila Leibniz, parang it seems to me like that, but then it's kind of reverse in the sense that we look at the effects instead of the causes themselves. So I'm not sure if I'm getting it right.
Forget Leibniz at this point, because our metaphysics is not going to be either rationalism or empiricism. That's the dualism that we're trying to avoid. Okay? We are not going to be either Plato ideas or Aristotle substance. No. We are about what I experience and the reason for me experiencing these things the way they are experienced. Do you get that?
Yes, sir, I get that.
So it's not all in the mind, like the rationalist would say. For the rationalist, what is really real? That which is in the mind, because they never change. For the realists, the empiricists, that what is really real is what we experience. And so there's a great divide. No, we're not going to make that kind of division. Okay? And that's the strength of Thomistic metaphysics, the way it is understood by transcendental, phenomenological, existential Thomists like, okay, Norris Clark and company. Look, I am I think it was last year when I started trying to explain or introduce metaphysics by reading a portion of a book by some, I hope I don't have any UST people here, by some Dominican teacher in UST. And I practically used that introduction to metaphysics to explain what we are not about. Mean, right? Some of my students said, "Father, you're mean." And I said, no, sometimes it is best to understand something by looking for what it is not. Okay? All right, Christian? But let me just end with this. With the inquiry subjected, I cannot see this. Let me. We are here. If you must note, we still have a long way to go. With the inquiry subjected to and guided by the critical testing of the thinker's own personal intelligence, according to the evidence available to him. Look, it is not something that we just simply talk about. It must be something that we can substantiate. Okay, so I think that when you're trying to explain a metaphysical thesis, a thesis in metaphysics, this will be quite important. Can you explain it? Can you be critical about it? Okay, with results articulated in some sort of systematic way. After all, this is a science supposed to be. You cannot simply say, well, ontological difference is a difference between beings and being. What do you mean? Basta. That's what I read. That can't be acceptable. You have to be capable of asking yourself or critically testing that supposition or that thesis using your reason, and lay out your explanation in a systematic way. Point 1, point 2, point 3, and therefore, this is the conclusion. Okay, I understand the difference between a chair and a table, but that understanding will be more like ontic, understanding the ontic difference. But point number 2, when I ask what makes a chair being and a table being, then I'm beginning to understand that there is a difference between being chair and that by which it is in the first place being itself. And so in that way, I was able to, let's say, do it systematically. Because you see, our thoughts can only understand if things are presented in a systematic way. I am sure that you will not, that you don't want a teacher to just simply talk and talk and talk and talk without being systematic about what he is trying to explain. Because if he's just talking and talking and talking, and there are no signposts that tell you this is where we are going and so forth and so on, it will be difficult to understand what's going on. Okay, which is what math looks like to me. When my teachers started talking about numbers, my mind shuts down because I don't know the difference between 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and so forth and so on. But you know what I mean, right? Is this clear? Okay, before I let you go, let me first, I will come back to this on Friday. When I was talking about intelligible unity, based on my experience of multiplicity, the one and the many, I was referring to something like this insight. Does anybody know what this is? Where's this?
Where is that in Palawan?
Palawan.
Palawan, sir.
Nido Palawan.
And this one. It's a
Church.
church.
I don't know where though.
You don't know where? Basilica ng, well, anyway, doesn't matter. And that one. What's that, guys?
Jeepney.
Oh, I'm sure you have ridden one. Not all Athenians have ridden one. Not all Athenians have ridden one. And what would be this? It's a presentation of the way.
Buddha fight.
Okay.
Pamayan.
That's not a Buddha fight. I'm sorry. That's the way people used to eat in the provinces. And of course, it's romanticized because it's a painting. Okay. And that one. What do you think is this?
Manila.
Is that the slums?
That's right. Is that the slums? Shame on you. You haven't seen a slum before?
I have, but just
Okay.
making sure.
Okay, it is. And I lived there for 1 month. Okay. How about this? Who is that?
30.
There, the Ravenna, and he's a blue eagle. So this is the multiplicity. What do you think will allow you to understand this multiplicity? What does that look like now?
The flag, sir. The Philippine flag, sir.
But it is a symbol for the entire Philippines, right? So the multiplicity, the one, the many, and the one, they are all Philippines. That's how we are going to understand metaphysical inquiry. It's the attempt to render intelligible through the unity of the multiplicity that we experience. So please read, okay? And we will see each other again on Friday. And if you have questions, raise them when we begin our class on Friday. So thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Bye, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
sir.
Bye.
sir.
Sir.
Okay, Angelo.
Father, we're
What can you
still
do for me?
Father, we're still recording. Father, can you stop
yeah.
recording?
Let me stop that.